I don't know that pretending that you don't have questions or saying that those questions aren't valid enough to walk through and just pressing that down, I don't think that's a healthy or faithful way to live, frankly. I think that's part of our job. If, as people who follow God, who are looking for God, who are sharing divine love with other people, I think that is one of the tasks we've been handed. Like, if you look around and you just take things at face value, this is sort of a hopeless place. But I think part of the church's duty is to offer hope.
Hey, friends. Welcome back to the Broken to Beloved podcast. I hope to provide practical resources through compassionate conversations to move toward healing and wholeness. We're officially kicking off season 2 of the podcast, and I'm so excited to get this season started and share this conversation with you. We do still have a few spots available for our Through cohort, so if you're interested in looking for a group to help process through your pain, your story of spiritual abuse with a safe group, apply today at brokentobeloved.org/through. Today, we're talking with Erin Moon about her new book, I've Got Questions, the spiritual practice of having it out with God. Erin is a writer, podcaster, and storyteller who helps people disentangle faith by creating a kind and curious community that welcomes honest doubt and questions. She's the resident Bible scholar and host of the Faith Adjacent podcast and senior creative at Popcast Media Group. A homesick Texan, she lives in Birmingham, Alabama, with her husband and 3 children, where she bravely tries to live without yellow queso every day. And here is my conversation with our new friend, Erin. Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm super excited, and I don't know what my life is anymore. You mentioned yellow queso in your bio, and yes. I have to ask, do they have this mystery white sauce in Alabama?
Okay, are you talking about the barbecue sauce, like that you get on? Okay, I know there is like a white queso here that is frankly an abomination. It tastes like someone melted a candle down and was like, "Please stick your chips in this. It's delicious." I'm like, y'all, I need you to know that there's something better out there.
Yes. So we moved to Richmond, Virginia about 6 years-ish ago, I think, from the Northeast. And there's this mystery white sauce that they serve with chips everywhere you go. And it tastes like ranch adjacent, but I have no idea what it is.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think Mexican restaurants, places that you can get queso in Virginia are good. They're not going to know. You know what I mean?
I'm going to go with you there. Yes. I'm going to agree with you because I'm always like, what? I don't understand what's happening.
Yeah, that's wild.
I want this to be queso, but it's not.
I know.
2 of our values at Broken to Beloved are curiosity over certainty.
Oh, I love that.
Agency over prescription.
Okay. Yes. I'm
into it. And I felt so validated in holding those values throughout the book because you provide really clear and deeply researched things, open-handed questions, and you make room for people to arrive at their own conclusions.
Oh, I'm glad that's what you got. That means a lot to me.
That is absolutely what I got out of it. And I don't remember where in the book this is, but here's a little quote that this is deeply personal work. When I first pitched this book, I wanted to walk through each hot button topic I'd puzzled over and show my work to the class. But those were my questions and you have your own. Your questions are for you and we are not the same. And I just want to say thank you for that.
Oh, thanks.
And I want to ask, why did you choose that route? Because I've read lots of other books that don't, and you allude to one in your afterword that definitely doesn't.
Yeah.
And I come across other, whatever it is, podcasts, channels of people who are taking the route to kind of take a stand on things or to be really prescriptive about things or whatever it is. So where does that come from for you?
Well, I think prescriptive is kind of how some of us got to this place of needing to ask these questions because it was like a one-size-fits-all sort of vibe. And that I don't know that necessarily is helpful. And so I think one of the keys to kind of getting over that hill of asking questions, of starting to be comfortable with that, I think it's shame. I think asking questions gets villainized through shame.
Yes.
And when I read the book that I mentioned in the afterword, that's all I felt was shame. And I did not want to bring that to the table. I did not want my personal questions to get in the way of someone else's wholehearted situation. It's so personal. What troubles you may not trouble me. I may have come to terms with it already. What sticks in your craw may not stick in my craw. And so I think we're all in different spaces and we're all on different, portions of the of the faith exploration, if that's what we've decided to do. And so I just that felt prescriptive to me, and I didn't want to do that.
I so appreciate it. And I know that the people who listen to our podcast will also appreciate that, because that feeling of shame is so strong in our community of people saying, well, I thought I was supposed to, or I was told I should, right? And we kind of get shitted on everywhere we go.
Absolutely.
And so I always appreciate people who come and approach things with an open-handedness of, here's what worked for me, and it may absolutely not work for you, but here's what I have to share.
Yeah, exactly.
Or here's what I've learned.
That's 100% what I hope comes across. So
great. I just so appreciated that tone throughout the whole book. And then the whole thing launches with, let's burn it to the ground. Which I also love. I love. So I want to talk about burning it to the ground.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate what you share about controlled burns, which I remember learning about from many years ago with the early Pioneer Woman recipe blogs.
First of all, I'm obsessed with the fact that you know about controlled burns from Ray Drummond. That's amazing. Like, that's my favorite thing ever.
It's a deep cut from early years of life and marriage of trying to learn how to cook things at home. And, and I just thought she was hilarious and amazing before she got the TV show and all the things.
Yeah.
But that's where I learned about controlled burns. I was like, her husband's a cowboy and they do all these things. Tell us about controlled burns. Tell us about what it means to you to burn things to the ground, because it's a theme throughout the book. And then I have other quotes and things we can take from there.
Yeah. So I think, I grew up in West Texas, in the panhandle of West Texas. And I don't know if you're familiar with that part of the country, but it's a more difficult beauty to access. We're not mountainous, or we don't have beaches. We have a lot of space, and it's very dry. And probably every other boy that I went to high school with has a story about almost setting a field on fire or definitely setting a field on fire. And because there's nothing there to stop it, and there's nothing there to stop trees, there's no trees to stop the wind. It's very quickly, wildfires can be a real problem in our area. And so the reason that you do a controlled burn, this is a practice from indigenous people and forestry scientists, but essentially what you're doing is you are burning the things that would get out of control later. So it's a low intensity fire. It gets started intentionally, and you're clearing out that overgrowth that otherwise, if a match strikes it, it's gone. So you're doing it in a very controlled environment. And it's not a fire that gets set with the purpose of, I'm going to destroy things. It's a fire that is conditioned towards purposeful renewal. And I think that's really important, because after a fire happens in a controlled burn, what you have is obviously you have ash, you have a burnt out section, but it's also used to encourage growth. So, you might have vines or some sort of detritus that is choking out real powerful growth happening in that plot of land. And so the idea of a controlled burn, it doesn't end with fire. It doesn't end with desolation. It ends because there's more to do. There's more growth that can happen. And sometimes you're pulling out what's choking that potential growth. And so that's why I really love that metaphor.
I love it. I love it so much. And you already called out one of my favorite quotes. It's a fire set not toward destruction, but towards purposeful renewal.
Yeah.
I also wrote down, I'm glad I didn't know, because I think I would have assumed burning it down would be the death of me. And now I know that striking the match feels like it might kill you, but it won't. The only thing that will kill you is pretending everything is okay when it's not. Man. And then the last one, just because a burned out field looks like catastrophic damage to the untrained eye that has never seen a controlled burn.
Yeah.
And I think what we are experiencing and seeing a lot of are uncontrolled burns in the deconstruction space.
Sure.
Of the people who are declaring the burn it all downs, right? And it's dare I say, it's like the Capitol riot of the faith space of just uncontrolled chaos of, we don't know what's happening. We just need to react to something. And so here it is.
And I 100% understand that desire, like knowing that something is wrong or off, and being like, I don't know how to fix this, or I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to walk through this. But I think that when you are standing metaphorically at, on your little plot of land, your faith, and you drop that match, that it is a rug out from underneath you, because these are the things that you have potentially stood on for your whole life.
Yes.
And to have that taken away, to have that ripped from you is traumatic, I think. And so it always is going to feel, resurrection doesn't feel good in the moment, I don't think. And so I think when you set that fire, it's never going to feel like that was the right thing. And other people are not going to understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important too. And I love that you take it towards the purposeful renewal, and you have that theme of this plot of land that you are on throughout the whole book. And I just was looking at and quoting from Lori Wilbert today, the Understory, and that beautiful book that she has there.
It's incredible.
And it felt very close, like related to yours for me. And one of the other lines you say is, you will feel the heat, taste the ash, and maybe experience the slow microscopic push of new green life being born out of something dead. Because with every atom I am made of, I believe that when someone seeks truth, they do not come up empty-handed. And for people who are afraid to light the match, or they think it's too extreme, right? You're saying that we're not tweaking or recalibrating, we're overthrowing an insidious regime, right?
Yeah.
What would you say to people who think this to be too extreme?
I think I would ask, too extreme compared to what? Compared to living with that in your chest for the rest of your life? I don't know that pretending that you don't have questions, or saying that those questions aren't valid enough to walk through and just pressing that down, I don't think that's a healthy or faithful way to live, frankly.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to fear. And listen, let me be clear. I understand the fear 100%, but extreme compared to living with that the rest of your life, I just don't think it is that extreme, because I really do believe that there is good growth on the other side of that.
Yeah, agreed. I love it. I'm very much into liminal space and the idea of seasons and moving through things. And I saw someone else post something about the winter and how we don't have to keep acting like the winter is just death and cold.
Yeah.
Because it's that season of just rest and waiting and storing up energy for something new to happen in the spring. And I think so often in faith spaces, we bypass or want to rush through all of that without the season of grief and lament and patience and waiting. And so I also appreciate the time and care that you take, counter to all the toxic positivity that we see in the church, right? To talk about grief and lament, right? And it's the whole chapter or section, I forget, which I thought was hilarious, of White Lion, Hot Dog, Jonathan, Jesus. And so I'm going to just keep referencing things in the book so people are forced to just buy it and figure out what the heck we're talking about.
That's an excellent marketing strategy. Thank you.
Talk about, why do you devote so much space to the grieving process?
One, I think for my own personal self, I know how much I resist grief, how much I want to bypass it. And I know that that's true for other people. I think some people are very well versed in holding grief throughout their lives. That is not me. I would much rather ignore it and push it down. And I think I say in the book, like, I'm very bad at the sads. Like, that is not where I thrive at all. And so, one, I know that is something that a lot of people struggle with. And two, I think we don't want to do it, or we just forget that it's a valuable process to walk through. Something has been taken from you. Something has hurt you. There has been some sort of spiritual death, whether that's from the church or from the way you learned how the Bible was written, whatever it is. Something has caused you pain. And in order to move through that, you have to grieve. You have to grieve the expectations that you had for your faith life. And it's not fun. It's deeply unfun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Deeply unfun. And I feel like it dovetails so nicely with the work of, I don't know if you're familiar with J.S. Park and his newest book, As Long As You Need.
What a tender human.
So beautiful.
Oh my gosh.
So he is one of those who is beautifully attuned to, I mean, as a hospital chaplain in a trauma 1 center, right? He's used to seeing that. And yet, because they just had to put their dog down after, I think it was 10 years. And it was so sad. And just watching him walk through that for himself and need the comfort of other people and admits like, oh, I wrote the book, but I don't have this all figured out.
Yeah.
Right. I love the way you outline the practice of Shiva throughout. And I'm familiar-ish with it, but I love the work that you show and share. I love that you went to real people. I love that you went to Jewish scholars who actually live it instead of just reading and appropriating the term, and that you're careful about the way that you do that. Tell us more about that practice.
So I think, to me, it feels very similar to the church calendar. I think, you were talking earlier about that liminal space and about seasons. And I think that is that's why I'm so connected to the church calendar, because it moves us through those seasons. And it's like, hey, I'm not Lent, for example, I'm not asking you to be happy right now. Nobody has to be happy. In fact, we discourage your happiness. And that is monumentally revolutionary. We focus so much on, just brush it off or, have a strong faith. So much. And there are seasons in this church calendar that say, you don't have to do that. That's Western Christianity talking. That is not Jesus. And Shiva feels very similar to me of that, like, hey, no one is asking you to put on a brave face. No one is asking you to be okay or to quote unquote grieve well, which is really one of the phrases that I hate the most in Western Christianity. Like, what does that even mean? And I think with Shiva, it's doing the same thing. It's moving you through that process, and it's giving you permission to feel the way you want to feel, and to be angry and to be sad and to not speak to anyone. I mean, there are so many little tiny gifts in that process that I thought whoever was the one that came up with this, that person was attuned, because that person knew and understood that grief process, and that we don't have to just kind of, smear some paint over it and make it okay.
Yeah. I think that whole section and theme was so beautifully done for me, of our inability, but also invitation to just sit with it. Just sit with it.
Yeah.
So much of the book is about deconstructing our old ideas of things, and, as you say, having it out with God. And you say that we might consider one of the greatest eras of deconstruction comes from our guy, Jesus himself. And I love that you point that out, because I think so many people who are railing against the deconstructors kind of tend to forget that.
Absolutely. I think they don't even have to go back that far. They're forgetting the Reformation.
Yeah. Hello.
I mean, you don't even really have to go that far.
Yeah. And I love that you pointed out partially at like I bite my thumb in your general direction to the overly pious and the self-righteous. And it's also primarily an incredible validation for those of us that have just been there, right?
Yeah.
Part of the deconstruction and reconstruction journey of Jesus, not about individual shaming, but drawing attention to, hey, you've heard it said, guys, but I want to tell you that this is actually what it means, right?
Yeah.
And you say that this is not a man afraid of a question.
No.
And you mentioned that earlier. And I love that you point that out for us and give people permission to ask the hard questions. I think you even say, just like lament, we shouldn't half-ass the questioning portion of our process, which I also love.
Yeah.
You point out how older generations and so-called heroes of the faith had their doubts and struggles. Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Henry Nouwen. Tell us more. Martin Luther, Reformation, hello. Tell us more about that process or that journey, or journey, take a drink. Just tell us more about that part.
Well, I think, I always want to be really careful when talking about like rabbinical prophecies from the Old Testament or, and Jewish theology, because one, I'm definitely not an expert. And then two, it's from an enormously Christian perspective, what I'm about to say. So caveats all the way down. But, Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And because Jesus was Jewish, then our theologies are inextricably linked. I think that's just true. Probably to their chagrin, but I think I think when I started reading the Sermon on the Mount again, because there was a time when I was like, I'm going back to the Gospels and we're gonna relitigate this. I probably haven't read through this in maybe my whole life, and let's do that. So doing that, and that phrase, you have heard it said, but I say, I thought, oh, oh my gosh. And that's, I feel like that's true even in the Messiah portion of Jesus's life, to say, hey, you think I'm coming here to release you from a political power, from essentially a dictatorship. But I'm actually here to release your heart. I'm here to change your heart, not change your situation. And that to me was so powerful, that he was kind of saying like, hey, the things that you think I'm about, I'm actually over here. I'm doing something a little different. And that's going to change not only how you live, but the way that you believe and the way that you love others.
I love it. I love all of it. Thank you for sharing that. I'm also intrigued by the idea of wrestling with God and not giving up until we receive a blessing. I talked with Christopher Stewart, who's on Instagram as the Disabled Priest. And he is an ordained priest who suffered this massive brain injury that has left him permanently disabled, can't use his hands, needs physical care for basically doing all of the basic things. And we talk also about Jacob and wrestling with God and the tension of living with a disability that we actually receive from God or an angel or a Christophany or whatever, whoever. But I didn't talk with him about the blessing part of that. Would you share more about the blessing of wrestling with God?
I think wrestling by nature is enormously intimate. It's actually uncomfortable because there's just so much. Like I went with my daughter to one of her friends is on the wrestling team at the middle school last year. And I was like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Like there's just so much skin slapping and there's no clothes. Like you can't hide anything.
No.
But it is so intimate.
Yeah.
And you cannot really, like, you have to be close to someone in order to wrestle with them. And so I think what I appreciate about that Jacob story, which that has really been the crux for me, something that has completely changed my perspective, was like, hey, this is the way it's supposed to be. That I talk about it in the book that, Amy Jill Levine, who I adore and is such a fabulous writer. She's a Jewish theologian, but she talks a lot about Jesus. And in one of her books, she talks about how Jacob wrestling with God, give me the blessing. And then not only does God change Jacob's name to Israel, he changed the name of his entire people to Israel.
I love that.
And to me, and that is actually what Israel means. We think some sort of like, I wrestle or I fight. And I can't ignore that God put that name on it, on his chosen people. So to me, it was just a very powerful story that spoke to something much, much more intimate than this God on a mountain situation. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, and you say having it out with God is your spiritual heritage. The wrestling is not the problem. It is the point. And I think far too many people are choosing to stay in their comfort zone of, well, something feels uncomfortable here, but I'd much rather just stay.
Yeah.
And not fight or not ask the questions because I would lose too much. Yeah, I totally get it. I totally get it. And at some point, there's that breaking point where it's like, okay, I need to engage this.
Yeah.
It's time to wrestle now.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciate, again, the tension that lies there with people think it's about fighting or wanting to do my own thing or just wanting to believe whatever I want. And it's just so often not that at all.
It often comes from a very different place from that. In fact, I've never spoken to one person who has gone through deconstruction, and they could be out there. I don't know. But I've never spoken to one person who's like, you know why I did this? I just really want to sin some more. I just really feel like sinning.
Same. Yeah. I just really wanted that drink, or I just really wanted to go sleep with that person. It's
Yeah.
like, that's never the thing.
No.
Yeah. Also, I just have to quote this because I laughed literally out loud and then immediately ran to my wife to read it to her. Grappling with the God of the universe, if you're ready to do that, takes balls because you have to be tender, and it takes a uterus because you have to be tough.
It's true.
Brilliant line, Erin. Thank you.
Another space my mother will be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said balls in this book. I'm sorry, Mom.
It is what it is, Mom. Sorry. Would you like to talk some more about the periaqueductal gray?
Oh my gosh. My favorite thing about the brain is fascinating to me.
So fascinating.
I mean, there are worlds we have not discovered in our brains, which is just wild to me. But the periaqueductal gray is the part of your brain essentially where scientists believe that your beliefs come from. Like that's a place in your brain. And I think I spend like a whole chapter talking about just the way that we think and the way that we process and how important that is to our souls. Like they're connected. Our brains and our souls are connected, and that's how we work these things out.
Yeah. That whole thing was so fascinating. And I had heard the stories about Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel and all these things. And it was such a beautiful reminder to me and a different way to view that. And the question that you asked that would likely explode some other people's brains, are beliefs made up in our heads? It's like, wait a minute, I can't begin to touch that with a million-mile pole.
It's a very scary question.
It's such a scary question.
Did I just come up with this? That's terrifying. Am I basing my whole life on something that's in my brain?
Yeah.
And I don't think that we can divorce ourselves from our minds. And I believe God gave us those minds. And who's to say that that isn't just one of the mechanisms that God uses to reach out to us or to show God's love to us? I think we are so afraid of science and these types of things because we don't want to do God in the gaps, or we don't want to think that like, oh, the Big Bang happened and it wasn't God. And I understand that 100%. But I also think that our brains are one of the gifts that God gives us. And so it doesn't surprise me that there's a spot in there that centers around belief. That makes total sense to me. And so it's not the scary thing necessarily that I think it could be.
Yeah. But I love the, again, invitation to engage with those really hard questions that could feel really impossible. Because, gosh, did I just make all this up? And what happens if I start to examine it and everything falls apart?
Yeah.
It totally makes sense why it's so scary and people don't want to do it. And at the same time, we don't want to excuse people who refuse to engage it because they would lose their sense of power or control or influence or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's where in the spaces I'm in, where the spiritual abuse begins to take place, is when it's manipulated or when it's, people are conditioned or whatever those things are. So I just appreciate, again, the tension that you walk and the tightrope there between the two to just say, hey, let me just throw this out there.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Just throw something out there. It's fine.
Just here we go. I just finished Letters to a Young Poet like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Your whole letter to Liz, which is beautiful, read like Letters to a Young Doubter to me.
Wow. That's okay. I'm going to sit with that for a minute.
You just take that. I don't need a response. There is no question. I just needed you to know that.
Okay.
It felt like correspondence with a modern day Clive Staples because of the tenderness, the allowance for how many hard things were being asked, the grace with which you respond, like we said at the beginning, without prescriptions, without, well, here's what you should do, or have you considered this? It's so beautifully open-handed and allows Liz to just arrive wherever she needs to without saying, well, here's what I did, or here's what you should do.
Yeah.
And so I just need to hear that. You can sit with it for as long as you want.
I'm going to hide that in my heart.
Yes. And what I do want to talk about is hope.
Yeah.
It's what I'm always striving for at Broken to Beloved, that there is already so much brokenness. There is already so much pain. We talk so much about abuse and trauma and all the hard, dark things. that I'm always looking for that glimmer of hope, right? And I love that you say the only way to access real hope is through telling the truth. And hope, by definition, looks stupid, feels foolish, and seems flimsy as a strategy. And I would say, and yet.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And yet. Tell us about hope. Why should we hope after all of this?
I think it's amazing that hope even exists as a concept. I mean, to me, it feels like another one of those gifts from God that, hey, it's going to get dark down here for whatever reason. And that should, like, we should not have the ability to hope. That's not like our you know, if we are not souls, if we don't have any kind of connection to some sort of divine love, I just don't think hope is evolutionary. I just don't think hope is evolutionarily helpful at all.
Yeah.
It's and so it's kind of amazing to me that we have it as a concept at all. And I think what I don't want that toxic positivity false hope, because that's just BS. But I think if you can tell the truth about the situation or what you're going through or how you feel, or look something in the eye that's very painful, that is when hope can come through, because you are there. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that freedom, I think, is where hope comes from.
Yeah. I also just finished Hope for Cynics by Jamil Zaki, and he talks about the line between cynicism and skepticism.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that skepticism is the scientific gathering of evidence so I can make up my mind about something. And that idea that hope should not be evolutionary because it's not survival of the fittest, right? Hope goes against everything that we see.
Absolutely.
And everything we've experienced to say, yeah, but maybe.
But maybe.
If I just hold on a little bit longer, just maybe.
Yeah.
Right? I like that you say there's no denying that when you see someone, even yourself, in their belovedness, it can change who they are, how they live, and their purpose in the world. And I cannot stop looking at the cracks where the light breaks free. It's a beautiful line. And
Thank you.
That's the kind of line that provides hope, I think, because I think I'm always looking for those cracks.
Yeah. I think that's part of our job. If, as people who follow God, who are looking for God, who are sharing divine love with other people, I think that is one of the tasks we've been handed. This is kind of like, if you look around and you just take things at face value, this is sort of a hopeless place. But I think part of the church's duty is to offer hope. I don't think we do a good job at that. Very often.
Not so much.
Yeah.
Not so much. Judas. Goodness. I get teary just thinking about that section. Using our quote unquote sanctified imagination, right? In this exercise that you did, I forget if it was your counselor, your spiritual director, somebody. What bugs me about the Judas narrative, you're right, I grew up with, is the suggestion that someone, and by extension, any of us, can go beyond God's grace. And when I use my sacred imagination, I am Judas.
Yeah.
That whole thing. Would you talk us through that process for you?
I think for me, the Judas narrative, one, I spend a lot of time looking at different interpretations and looking about how a certain idea in scripture came about. And one of the things that really kind of made me go, about Judas is that he has been given this really dark narrative, but he loved Jesus. He was with Jesus. He saw all of the same things that the rest of the disciples saw. And it doesn't follow, and just because it doesn't make sense to me doesn't mean it's not true, obviously, but it doesn't follow that someone who had given so much of their lives would kind of act on this betrayal narrative. And I think what kind of unpacking Judas did for me was it helped me realize, like, the love of God is so much wilder. The mercy is so much greater than I could have ever imagined. And it's so beyond me. It feels, when you try to think about eternity and you're like, oh, I think I got it. No, I don't have it. I don't have it. It's the same thing. It is so expansive. And if it's true for me, it has to be true for Judas as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that really kind of shook me up a little bit.
Same. And I think that I wonder if that's what makes people who are not wanting to engage with the questions or not wrestle or not have it out with God, that is the fear. That if this happened to Judas, maybe it could happen to me.
Absolutely. 100%.
And then I would go back to, and yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Because these are the questions that we don't have the answers to.
Mm-mm.
We just have to sit and wonder and wait. And if we choose to hope.
Yeah.
I'm going to read a long quote, if that's okay. And it's okay because it's my podcast, I guess.
And I'm going to do what I want to do.
It really feels like you captured the heart of what we believe and try to shout from the rooftops. This is towards the end of the book. Especially for those of us who grew up in evangelical culture, we were taught to distrust ourselves, to see ourselves first and foremost as sinners, disobedient little rat finks filled to the brim with selfishness and hate and idolatry. I'm not necessarily saying we aren't influenced by these things, but I would not say the same emphasis was put on our belovedness as children of God, because we are certainly that as well. And let's get real. We were beloved first. When we get it twisted and believe our deepest identity is as sinners, our sin and the things that separate us from God end up becoming greater than how we're treasured, we are held, we are cherished, and adored. Erin, thank you for that. One of the other values that we hold, I call goodness over wickedness. And it sounds simple, but I really base it on Genesis 1 versus Genesis 3, that we have an original goodness versus an original wickedness. And that so often, in some theological spaces more than others, there's that, tenet of just depravity and worm theology of, and I think we forget that we were created good first. And that was our original intent.
Yeah.
Would you just share a little bit more about your heart behind that section?
I think I once heard a sermon. This is a little graphic and I apologize, but I once heard a sermon that was like, hey, you are essentially a menstrual rag. Like that was what was, that was what was told.
I've heard
like,
that one.
What's the most, and I love it. It's a guy. What's the most disgusting thing you can think of? That.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't, yeah. And yes, we screw up and we sin and we do bad. Of course. Yes. That is 100% true. All you have to do is look around the world. And that's that's one of the most accessible things to understand. But we have gone too hard in the paint on that. Yeah. And we have forgotten. I think stuff like worm theology, I think that's an easy out. That's an easy way to not attempt to be loved. And that's an easy way to not have to, how do I want to say this? Look, it's hard to be, I think sometimes it's hard to be treasured. I think it's really hard sometimes to accept love. Right?
Yes.
Like it makes me I'm like, oh, no, thank you. Like, this is fine or whatever. But I think stuff like worm theology goes, I don't even have to think about that because I'm so freaking disgusting. I don't have to, I can focus on, justification through sanctification. I can focus on all this theological, stuff. And I can make this very cerebral so I don't have to engage my heart in it. And so to me that I just want to balance the scales a little bit to go, yeah, that is true. I mean, yeah, again, look around, but there's also something else that's true at the same time. And it is, I think if we are leaning that way, we are going to lean into belovedness and into who we actually are at the core of ourselves, which is children of God.
Yeah. That's our whole thing.
Yeah.
That's our whole thing, is to point people towards their belovedness, because it feels like we've been broken for so long. And that's my story that I tell over and over. It's like, I thought I was broken so many times, and for so long I took it on as my identity.
100%. That's a great way to put that. Putting it on as your identity. Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. That's
And
really
so
smart.
we live out of our brokenness as if this is just the way I'm supposed to be because this is who I am.
It's like the moment you find out your Enneagram number, and then you are like, well, look, I'm acting this way because of my number. I can't help it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can.
You can.
don't
You
have
absolutely
to be
can.
a terrible person just because there's an out for you to be a terrible person.
Yeah. I do a lot of Enneagram work and coaching and stuff. And so I have ground rules that I set before I work with people. And it's don't use it as a sword and attack someone else for their number.
That's
don't
good.
use it as a shield and hide behind your own bad behavior.
Wow.
And then I always quote Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. And once you know better, do better.
She said it. It stands the test of time. Absolutely.
She said it. So what else do we need, right?
Exactly.
I could talk for like 4 more hours about your book. I'm not going to. But thank you again so much for taking the time to write it, to take the long publishing game and wait for it to come out. Where can people find or connect with you?
I am on the internet in every place that I am. It is Erin H. Moon. So Instagram, Erin H. Moon, Substack, website. That's it. So if you want to find me, that's where you start. So,
Erin, your book is a gift. You are a treasure. Thank you so much for being with us. Everyone, go get the book. I've Got Questions: The Spiritual Practice of Having It Out with God. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a fun conversation. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, be sure to follow Erin and say thanks for being on the show. You can find links and all the things in the show notes on our website. The 2025 Summit is over, but you can still watch the sessions with an all-access pass. You'll get lifetime access to the session and bonus session recordings, transcripts, a private podcast feed, exclusive downloads, and bonuses from our speakers, and more. We have a few spots left in our Through cohort. If you're looking for a safe place to process and share your story and gain practical tools, apply today for our 8-week cohort. Scholarships are available in the application. And if you're interested in reading Erin's book, it's our official book selection for the book club. Join our community for virtual reading sessions, hangouts, and a book discussion with Erin. You can find links for everything in the show notes and at our website. As a 501c3 nonprofit, our work is made possible by our generous donors. If it's been helpful to you, consider joining us today at brokentobeloved.org/support. Coming up on the show, we have Sam Jolman, Beth Allison Barr, Diane Langberg, and lots more. Subscribe or follow the show to get new episodes automatically. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review or share with your friends. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to moving toward healing and wholeness together. I'll see you next time.